She didn't say hello. That was the first thing I noticed. My phone rang on a Thursday morning in early October, and I was standing at the kitchen window watching the neighbor's dog chase something along the fence line. I picked up on the second ring. There was a half-second of silence before she spoke, and then what she said was this. "Did you transfer the October payment yet?" Not good morning. Not how are you doing. Not even my name. Just did you transfer the October payment yet? I told her I hadn't. I told her I hadn't because no one had sent me any information about what October's payment was supposed to cover. She made a sound that I can only describe as impatient, the kind of sound you make when a vending machine takes your dollar and doesn't drop the snack. Then she said she would email me a breakdown and ended the call. I set the phone down on the counter and stood there for a moment. The coffee maker was still running. Outside, the dog had given up on whatever it was chasing and was sitting in the grass, looking satisfied anyway. I want to tell you about my son, because none of what came later makes sense unless you understand who I believed him to be, and who I believe he still is underneath all of it even now, after everything. He was the kind of kid who drew floor plans. I don't mean doodles. I mean he would sit at the dining room table with graph paper and a ruler and draw out the layout of rooms, where the tables would go, how wide the aisles needed to be, where the light would fall in the afternoon. He was 11 the first time he did it. I asked him what he was building, and he said, very seriously, a restaurant. Not a restaurant, the restaurant, like he already knew the exact one. His mother passed when he was 26. That was 8 years before any of this. She would have known what to do. She always knew. I never stopped being aware of that gap. After she was gone, my son and I found a rhythm. Sundays, mostly. He would come over and we would watch whatever game was on and eat whatever I had made too much of during the week. His wife, they had been married about 2 years by then, came sometimes, but not always. She had her own family, her own routines. I didn't think much of it. The restaurant idea never went away. He talked about it the way some men talk about their boats always on the water in their minds, always about to launch. By the time he was 32, he had a business plan. By 33, he had a location. A building on a corner lot in a part of the city that was just starting to turn around, the kind of block where old barbershops sit next to new coffee places, and there's always a food truck parked somewhere nearby on weekends. He showed me the plan on a Sunday in February. Snow was still on the ground. He had printed it out and put it in a folder with the word proposal on the tab, which made me smile because it felt formal in a way that was very like him. I read the whole thing that afternoon while he sat across from me, quiet, watching. The numbers were real. The concept was thought through. He had done the work. I asked him how much he needed. He told me. I want to be clear about something. What I gave him was not a loan. I want to be clear about that, because it matters to what came later. I gave him the money as an investment. We talked about it for a long time, that Sunday, and the next 2 Sundays after that. We agreed that I would hold a 20% stake in the business. He would run it, he would own the majority, and I would be a silent partner in the day-to-day, but present in the bigger decisions. We shook hands on it. He said, "Dad, I'm going to make you proud." I believed him without any hesitation at all. The amount was $280,000. It was most of what I had saved over 31 years of running a small construction company, the money I had set aside after your mother, and I planned to travel, money that had been sitting quietly in accounts, gaining interest, while I figured out what the second half of my life was supposed to look like. I don't tell you that number for sympathy. I tell you because it was real and it was mine, and I gave it freely to my son because I trusted him completely. The months that followed were busy in a way that felt good. He was out at the location almost every day. He sent me photos, sometimes the new floors going in, the kitchen equipment arriving, the bar being built along the north wall. I recognized some of the contractors from my own years in the business, and I knew the work was being done right. I offered to come by twice, and both times he said it wasn't a good time. They were mid-phase. He'd let me know when things were further along. I didn't push. I had agreed to be a silent partner, and I was trying to honor that. His wife sent me the email breakdown the day after that Thursday call. It was detailed vendors, service fees, a quarterly maintenance account. The total came to just over $14,000, which was more than we had discussed in our original projections, but not so much more that I couldn't make sense of it, with some expansion of scope. I replied, asking for a call to go over the line items. She responded 3 days later saying she'd been busy, and could we just do a quick note back and forth. I said sure. That exchange went on for another week, and never quite resolved. I transferred the money because the due dates she had listed were approaching, and I didn't want vendors going unpaid over a timing dispute. But I noted that the conversation had never really happened. I was talking to my brother that weekend. He lives out in Colorado now, retired, grows tomatoes that he is unreasonably proud of. He asked how the restaurant was coming along, and I said I thought, well, as far as I could tell. He asked when it was opening. I realized I didn't know. The last time my son and I had spoken at any length was about 6 weeks prior. He had called to tell me the kitchen equipment had been fully installed and the inspections were going smoothly. He sounded excited, and I was excited with him. I asked when we were looking at for a soft open, and he said probably late fall, maybe early November. That was September. It was now the middle of October. I called him that Sunday evening. It went to voicemail. I left a message, casual, just checking in, asked him to call when he had a chance. He texted back the next morning, crazy busy, talk soon. I waited 4 days. I called again, voicemail again. I want to tell you what I did not do, because I think it matters. I did not drive over there. I did not call my daughter-in-law. I did not call anyone in the family to ask if something was wrong. I was trying to give him room. I had spent most of his adult life trying to give him room, maybe too much, I don't know. I just kept thinking he's busy, he's opening a restaurant. This is the hardest stretch, just let him work. But there was something sitting at the back of my mind that I couldn't name yet. A quietness where there should have been sound. The way you notice a clock, only after it stops. The answer came from somewhere I wasn't expecting. I was at a hardware store, the big one on Route 9, not the local place I usually go, and I ran into a man I had done a remodel for about 12 years back. We caught up for a few minutes the way you do in hardware stores, half-focused, one eye on the aisle. He asked what I was up to. I mentioned my son's restaurant. He said, "Oh, that place on Callaway Street? I drove past there last week. Looked open." I said I didn't think it was open yet. He said, "No, I'm pretty sure." There were people inside, lights on, a sign in the window. I thanked him and finished my shopping. I sat in my car in the parking lot for about 10 minutes before I drove anywhere. I want to tell you what it feels like to suspect something and not want to confirm it. There's a particular kind of stillness that comes over you. You become very aware of small things, the sound of a cart being returned to the rack, a cloud moving across the windshield, the weight of your hands in your lap. You are not panicking. You are bracing. I drove to Callaway Street. The restaurant was open. Not soft open, not a preview dinner for family. Open, fully open. There was a sandwich board on the sidewalk with a specials menu written in chalk. The windows were warm with light even in the middle of the afternoon. Through the glass, I could see tables with people at them, a server moving between them, the bar occupied along its full length. The signage was finished, his name in the design, the logo he had sketched 100 times on napkins over the years, rendered now in steel letters above the entrance. I did not go in. I sat in my car across the street for a while. I don't know exactly how long. Long enough for 2 different groups to enter. Long enough for the afternoon light to shift. I had invested $280,000 into this place. I had a 20% ownership stake agreed upon by a handshake and a conversation I had believed in entirely. And my son had not called to tell me it opened. Had not invited me. Had not, as far as I could tell, thought to include me in any way in the moment he had been building towards since he was 11 years old, with a ruler and graph paper at our dining room table. I drove home. I made dinner. I did not call anyone that night. The next morning I called my son. This time he answered. I kept my voice steady. I told him I had driven past the restaurant yesterday. There was a long pause. He said, "Yeah, we did a soft open a few weeks ago. It's been going well." A few weeks ago. I asked when exactly. He said he thought it had been about 5 weeks. I asked why he hadn't told me. He said things had been moving fast and he figured I'd come by when I was ready. When I was ready, I let that sit for a moment. Then I asked when the official opening had been. He said there had been a dinner about 3 weeks back, just close family and some investors. I asked him to clarify what he meant by close family. He said his wife's family, mostly, her parents, her sister, a few others. I said, "I'm your father. I put up the capital that made this possible. And you consider me less close than your in-laws?" He didn't have an answer to that. Or rather, he had a version of one. He said his wife had handled the guest list, and it had gotten complicated, and he was sorry I felt left out. I felt left out, like I had missed a party. Not like I had missed the opening of a business I owned a piece of. I told him we needed to meet. He agreed. He said he could do Thursday. In the days between that call and Thursday, I did something I probably should have done earlier. I went back through every financial record I had in connection with the restaurant, every transfer, every receipt, every email. I had been sending money in tranches since the previous spring, 11 separate transfers over 8 months. The total was exactly what we had agreed on. But when I laid the transfers against the project timeline he had shared with me, something didn't line up. There was a gap, a period of about 6 weeks where spending had been significantly higher than projected, and the explanation in the budget update I had received was listed simply as operational setup vendor prepayments. The amount was $31,000 above what I had been told to expect. I'm a contractor. I've been reading project budgets my entire adult life. Vendor prepayments as a line item without supporting invoices is not a normal thing. You have the invoices, or you don't call it that. I called a lawyer I had worked with on a commercial project a few years back, not to threaten anything. I just wanted to understand what my position actually was before I sat down with my son. He reviewed the agreement we had, which I had, to my credit, insisted on putting in writing, even though my son had pushed back slightly on formalizing it, which I had attributed at the time to his not wanting the relationship to feel transactional. The lawyer told me the agreement was valid. He also told me that a 20% ownership stake entitled me to access to financial records, which I had not asked for and had not been offered. I printed out everything I had. I put it in a folder. I drove to the restaurant on Thursday at the time we had agreed. My son was there alone. His wife was not present, which I had not expected but was quietly relieved by. We sat at a table near the window, the one with the best light, the one I suspected he had placed deliberately when he drew the floor plan. He looked tired. He also looked like he knew why I was there. I didn't open the folder right away. I asked him first how the opening had really been, whether it had felt the way he had imagined. He said yes. His voice went soft when he said it, the way it used to when he talked about things that mattered to him. I believed that part. I believed he had felt it. Then I asked him about the $31,000. He looked at the table for a moment. Then he told me his wife had decided, about 2 months before the opening, that the original vendor contracts were underpriced and that renegotiating them would protect the business long term. She had engaged a consultant, someone from her professional network, to manage the renegotiation. The consultant's fee had come out of the project funds, my project funds, without telling me, without asking me. I asked him if he had known this when it happened. He said he had found out after the fact. I asked him if he had told me. He didn't answer, which was its own answer. I want to tell you what I felt in that moment, because I think people expect something different than what it actually was. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't raising my voice. What I felt was a very deep sadness, the kind that doesn't announce itself, that just settles in like weather. I looked at my son, this person I had loved since before he could speak. This person I had driven to the hospital at 2 a.m. when he was 6 and had a febrile seizure. This person I had handed $280,000 to because I believed in what he was building, and I felt the distance between us as a physical thing. I opened the folder. I told him that as a 20% partner I was entitled to full financial disclosure, and that I was requesting a formal accounting of all expenditures from the time of my first transfer to the present. I told him the $31,000 needed to be either documented with proper invoices or returned to me. I told him that going forward, any expenditure above a threshold we would define together required my prior approval. He nodded. Then I told him the thing I had been thinking about since I sat across the street in my car. I told him that the money had never been the most important part. The money was a fact, a number. It had weight in the world, but it was not the most important part. What hurt was that he had opened those doors, had stood under those steel letters, had looked out at a room full of people on the night he had been imagining since childhood, and he had not called me. He had not thought to say, "Dad, I need you here." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I didn't think you'd want to deal with her." Her, his wife. I asked him what that meant. He said she had been managing everything, all the communications, all the finances, and that talking to me had become, he searched for the word, complicated. She didn't like dealing with me, he said. She found me difficult. She had told him it would be easier to just send the updates through email and keep things clean. I sat with that. I thought about all the phone calls that had gone to voicemail, the emails that took days to be answered, The way every financial conversation had been routed through her and then summarized back to me in language that left out the questions I had actually asked. I had not been managed out. I had been gradually, efficiently, reduced to a transaction. I told my son that I understood he was in a complicated position. I told him I was not asking him to choose sides. What I was asking him was to be honest with me, and to be present not because of the money, but because I was his father, and he was my son, and that still meant something to me, and I needed it to still mean something to him. He looked at me for a long time. His eyes were red at the edges. He said, "It does, Dad." I believed him. I want to say that clearly I believed him when he said it. We agreed that I would receive a full financial accounting within 2 weeks. We agreed on a quarterly meeting going forward, in person, at the restaurant. We agreed that significant financial decisions would require my input before being executed. I asked him to be the one to tell his wife what we had agreed, and that I would not be calling her to renegotiate any of it. He said okay. I drove home along a different route than I had come. There's a park along the river that I used to take him to when he was small, and I drove past it without stopping, but I looked over at the picnic tables near the water, the metal grills on their posts, the path that circles the whole thing and comes back to the parking lot. We used to bring bread for the geese. The accounting arrived 12 days later. An attorney had clearly been involved in formatting it, which I took as a sign that my son was taking it seriously, or that his wife was taking it seriously, or both. The $31,000 was listed under the consultant's fee, with a proper invoice attached. The invoice was real. The work appeared to have been done. The problem had never been the consultant. The problem had been the decision to spend my money without telling me, which was not something an invoice resolved, but which was something I had already decided to treat as a correctable error rather than a terminal one. I had a conversation with the lawyer. He confirmed that everything in the accounting was consistent with the agreement and that I had no grounds for a claim I would have wanted to pursue anyway. What I had wanted was not a lawsuit. What I had wanted was an honest accounting, and I had one now. I went to the restaurant on a Saturday 3 weeks later. I didn't call ahead. I just drove over and walked in. My son saw me from across the room. He came over immediately. He looked like he hadn't been sleeping enough, which is a thing I recognized from his teenage years when he was working on something that mattered to him. He took me on a full tour, the kitchen, the storage system he'd built, the way the light moved through the south-facing windows in the late afternoon exactly as he had drawn it years ago on the graph paper. His wife was there. We were civil. We did not pretend more than that, and I think not pretending was the right call. There is a difference between repairing a relationship and papering over it, and I have lived long enough to know which one holds. I sat at the bar and had lunch. The food was very good. I told my son that, and I meant it. Here is the thing I keep coming back to, the thing I would say to any parent sitting with a version of this situation. The money is the loudest part of the story, but it is not the actual story. The actual story is about what we communicate when we make decisions without the people who love us. Every time my son let a call go to voicemail, every time he let his wife root an email instead of picking up the phone, he was communicating something. He wasn't doing it maliciously. I don't believe that. But he was doing it, and those communications accumulate. I was a contractor for 31 years. I know what a foundation looks like when it's been poured right, and when it hasn't. You can put a beautiful house on a bad foundation, and it will stand for a while, and then you will see the cracks, always, eventually, in places you did not expect. My son built something real. The floor plan he carried in his head for 20 years exists now in the world. People eat there. They come back. The thing he imagined became a thing that is. I am proud of him for that without reservation, but I needed him to understand that I was not a vendor. I was not a line item in a project budget. I was the man who drove him to the hospital at 2 a.m. when he was 6 years old, who stood at a grave with him when he was 26, who read his business plan in the snow in February and said yes because I believed in him. Investing in the people we love is not a transaction. It is a declaration. It says, I see what you are trying to build, and I am with you. The least that declaration deserves is to be seen in return. If you are a parent who has given something significant money, time, your own plans set aside, and you are finding yourself reduced to an invoice number, let me tell you what I learned from sitting in a car across the street from a lit-up building that I partly owned and had never been invited to enter. Don't wait until the anger is so large it requires a lawyer. Don't paper over it for the sake of keeping the peace, because paper is not peace. Have the conversation. Not to punish, not to reclaim, but to say, this is what I need from you, And it is not complicated. It is just honesty and presence. And those things are not too much to ask. The maple in my backyard is fully red now. Another October. My son called last Sunday. We talked for 40 minutes. He asked if I wanted to come in one evening this week, said the chef had added a new dish to the menu he thought I'd like. I said I would be there Thursday. I will be there Thursday.